So, morning everyone. I have a bad cold after 22 hours on a plane. Sorry about that. So I suppose that's a nice segue into the unsolved question I wanted to talk about, which is when do good inequalities turn into bad inequalities? And when we say good inequalities, is there such a thing? And I often think that if we look at we've seen the past few slides and now this slide, there's a definite difference between what we think of on the left and what we think of on the right. And when I say good inequalities, what it would translate to is if I think of any complex system, say I think of music, if we just had one note, there would be no music. So in a pure mathematical sense, their inequalities produce great beauty and great construction. However, and then I could go on and I could think of forest ecosystems, and I could think of economics, and I could think of economic systems and financial markets, and I could think of galaxies and star clusters. So matter in space coming together is what makes existence possible. So it's clear, and then coming to cities, we think of agglomeration, and we think of the idea that if there was no inequalities, there would be no flows, and there would be no spatial interaction. So in that sense, at some point, these sort of good inequalities come together, and we get what's called the benefits of agglomeration. But we also know that at some point, they transition into the bad inequalities. And that is when we see segregation and exclusion and deprivation and disadvantage. And as our data shows, large millions and millions and billions of people essentially fall on that side of the boundary rather than on this side of the boundary. So I guess I would like to pose this question of, is there a scientifically rigorous way to look at this question and say at what size, city size, population size, spatial size, at what scales, temporal and spatial, at what structural organizational levels, networks, do the good inequalities essentially transition into bad inequalities? And could we look at this as a sort of phase transition question in urban systems? And at all levels, not just spatial, but social and economic and technological and all those non-spatial things, how do they contribute to that phase transition, which is very, very manifest in spatial terms? And then, of course, do they vary across cities and urban systems? Like Sean said, there's sort of what do we call urban, right? And finally, policy-wise, are there any normative limits to urban growth? If we can find this transition point, can we then contribute to policy, thinking about when should a city stop and when should we start to think of other settlements around which are not getting sort of consumed?